Welcome to 5 and 5 from the One Stop Co-op Shop, where I discuss 5 key elements of a game in about 5 minutes. I'm Michael Kelly, and today I'm looking at Imperium, the solo and competitive deck building game of empire building. And a quick thank you to Osprey Games for sending me a review copy of the classic set. Colin has been doing a bunch of playthroughs of this recently and loving it. Did it hit the same level for me? Let's find out and get to the list. So starting at number 5, I have a full-on con, and that's how the game can be a bit fiddly and annoying. First of all, the rulebook isn't as clear as I would like. I had to watch Colin's videos to fully figure out how to play. And on top of that, there are some errata and missing rules, like a huge one for solo with the unrest cards that would totally mess up the solo game if you don't know it. But beyond that, setting up the game takes longer than it should. Tearing it down and separating all the card decks is annoying. Counting up your points and the AI's points takes a while. And generally speaking, there are just a lot of stress points that might bother gamers overall. But focusing in on the gameplay for my number 4, we have a mix, and that's looking at the Automa, because I am discussing the solo play here, not the competitive play. On the positive side, in each of the sets you can buy, Classics and Legends, they have 8 different Automa, one for each of the empires, and each of them has different charts that control their actions, different goals, they play differently, they interact and mess with you differently, so it can be fun to mix and match and see what they do. But on the negative side, it can be a bit tedious to go through their turn, because you'll have 4 or more cards that you have to flip up one at a time and cross-reference with their chart to see what they do. And doing that over and over, turn after turn, when your own turns are really quick, can be a bit of a chore. And the thing is, when you really get down to it, some of the Automa don't really interact with you that much, so it feels like you're going through all these motions without it really affecting your choices as a player much at all. But I'm moving up to a pro for my number 3, a big element of the game, which is the deck building, although I do have a pretty big caveat for this one. So the positive side of the deck building that makes this a pro for me is how strong the engine building is. This really reminds me of other engine-focused deck builders like Dominion, where you seek out specific cards and put together great combos. And this is one of the areas where the game really shines, because seeing your little barbarian culture at the beginning doing barely anything compared to the end where you have all these free actions and combos and all this great stuff you're doing really makes you feel powerful and accomplished. But the negative side of this, the one caveat I mentioned, is that in my games it feels like it tends to go several rounds longer than it should, and at some point you're kind of just running your engine into the ground and doing similar things turn to turn. So I wish the game was a little bit shorter. I feel like it kind of overstays its welcome, but that being said, the engine building and deck building is still great. And I'm sticking with a pro at number 2, but this one has no reservations because the tactical card play here is excellent. So to kind of keep my Dominion comparison going, one of the cool things about the card play is that while, like many deck builders, you'll have a hand of 5 cards, you have a limited number of actions, so you can't just play out your entire hand blindly. And that limit on card plays already makes things interesting, but you have so many cool choices beyond that. Lots of ways to cull your deck. You can put cards in your history under your empire card where you'll never see them again, which might be a bad thing if it was a good card for you. You can capture and play these territories and garrison other cards underneath them. You can spend actions to get rid of these negative unrest cards, which give negative victory points but at a steep cost. There are quite simply loads of interesting and compelling choices on every turn of the game. This is not a deck builder where your cards will play you. And finally, I have one more pro for my number 1, although again with a caveat, and that is the great faction variety on the player side. So even more so than with the Automa, each of the factions for the players plays very differently. They each have their own unique cards that they build into, which offer unique combos and choices for them. They have unique ways to get victory points that send them down different paths, so you might focus on this type of cards with this empire, and those types with another empire. And beyond that, especially when you get into the Legends sets, some of them do really wacky things where they play completely differently from the others. And if y'all have watched my reviews in the past, you know I love games with asymmetric factions, and this one has that in spades. The one caveat I mentioned is that when you play the same empire, the same faction, another time and another time after that, the combos tend to repeat. The things they're going for tend to be the same, so it can get a little bit samey if you stick with one empire, but if you let yourself move around from faction to faction, game to game, especially if you get both sets and have 16 to choose from, it should never get stale. So overall, you might want to avoid Imperium Classics and Legends if you don't like dealing with somewhat fiddly AI, because the Automa here can be a little annoying. And also if you don't want to deal with card shuffling, a lot of setup and teardown and counting of scores. But if you like varied factions and characters, if you like deck building, if you like tough tactical card play with lots of choices, I think Imperium really has all of that going on, and I definitely recommend this one for just solo. I think it's a good value already, but I I also enjoy the competitive play, especially with 2 players. When you get to 3 or 4, the downtime can be a little bit rough, but solo and 2-player competitive, a great game, definitely one I recommend. And if you want to see the solo gameplay in action, Colin's already done 2 videos and probably will have more coming because he loves this one. Click the link that just popped up if you want to watch one of them. Good gaming, and I'll see you at the next stop.